Hi, everybody. Welcome to the 14th year of the CITRIS Research Exchange Seminar Series. My name is Carl Blumstein. I am the Executive Director of the CITRIS Climate Initiative. And we have just talking a little bit about the program for these research exchanges. Here's a slide which you can read. It's just reminding you that there's every Wednesday, or well, not every Wednesday, but we're regularly announced on Wednesdays from noon to 1. We're going to do these virtually, and you can visit the CITRIS website for more details. We have hosted a remarkable lineup of technology innovators in person at Sudarjadai Hall and are glad to see all of you joining virtually today for the Fall 2022 series. So here is the Fall 2022 series. Just one more coming up, and be sure to join if you can. Before we begin the talk, I want to first highlight a few upcoming CITRIS events. Tomorrow on October, it's not actually, that's the wrong date here, but tomorrow on October 21st, CITRIS will host a CITRIS Aviation Flight Prize Demo. The next CITRIS Research Exchange will be held on October 26th from 12 to 1 for a discussion on artificial intelligence wildfire detection, customer stories with Andre Chung, founder and CEO of Robotic Cats. On March 2nd, 2023, CITRIS will host its Edge and Tech Symposium, Smarter Tech for a Resilient Future. Here are some virtual participation guidelines before we get into the talk. Okay, so submit your questions through the Q&A feature. If you like a question, then give it a thumbs up and that'll bring it toward the top of the list. So we'll get the most popular questions addressed first. We'll do that at the end of the talk. We'll start the question period at around 12:50, maybe a little bit earlier. Today we're joined by Sumeet Singh, who is the Executive Vice President, Chief Risk Officer, and Interim Chief Safety Officer at PG&E. Sumeet serves as Executive Vice President, and did that, overseeing the company's integrated workforce health and safety strategy, its safety culture and management of both operational risks, such as natural disasters, and non-operational risks, such as cybersecurity. He's held a number of leadership roles within PG&E, including the Senior Vice President, Chief Risk Officer, Vice President of Asset Management, and the Community Wildfire Safety Program, and Vice President of Portfolio Management and Engineering, and Vice President of Asset and Risk Management in PG&E's gas operation. He has also served as the Gas Safety and Integrity Officer at Picaro Incorporated. Singh holds a bachelor's degree from the University of California, Berkeley, and an MBA from UCLA. He's a registered professional engineer in the state of California and serves on the board of Stiles Hall, a nonprofit dedicated to helping low-income students of color excel in education. It's my great honor to welcome Sumeet Singh. Thank you for joining us, Sumeet.
Thank you, Carl, so much. Just doing a quick audio check. Can you hear me, Carl?
I can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And thank you for everyone that's joined us as part of this webinar. And really appreciate CITRIS extending the opportunity for myself and for PG&E to engage in this forum. And the focus of the discussion today, and look forward to your questions, is really around how we're approaching a balanced view on resiliency, reliability, and decarbonization in the face of the ever-evolving and changing climate conditions. And obviously, this is not unique to PG&E service area or California. Climate change is impacting a broader footprint globally. And the focus that I'll be sharing is more what we're doing in the near term, given the impacts of climate change and how adversely that's dramatically evolved the wildfire risk, and what actions we have taken and continue to take to ensure that everyone and everything is always safe. And then also talk about what is and what does our overall vision look like as it pertains to our role that we have as one of the largest utilities in the nation on helping heal the planet. So that's the two-part discussion. So if we can maybe go to the next slide, just kind of a perspective here. We'll share a little bit about PG&E for those that may not be as familiar, with our company and what we do and our geographic footprint, what our overall vision is as it pertains to climate change, the actions that we're taking, and what's next. So that's kind of the topics for discussion. But if we go to the next slide, thank you. So as I stated, we're one of the largest energy providers in the state of California, and for that fact, in the nation. And we understand that we've got a foundational role to help enable the transition of California to a more decarbonized and the climate resilient economy and a state. And California itself is very forward-looking and progressive in this regard. And I'll touch on some of the things that we're doing to help enable that in terms of our role. But just stepping back a little bit, if you look at our service area, it's 70,000 square miles. It's all located within the state of California. So the northern part of our service area is basically the border of California and Oregon. Out on the west, obviously, the Pacific Ocean, and then to the east, the Sierra foothills. And then on the south, right around Bakersfield, is where our service territory and service area that we're responsible for. And then SoCal, Southern California Edison, and Southern California Natural Gas Company take over as the utilities, which are obviously separate companies. So all in all, we have 5.5 million electric customers that we have the privilege of serving, and 4.5 million gas customers. And when you look at the asset base, it's a fairly significant footprint. So about 108,000 miles of electric distribution lines, which includes both overhead and underground. A large majority of the 108,000 miles tends to be overhead, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as to the implications of that and the relationship to the wildfire risk. And then 18,000 miles of overhead transmission lines, and nearly 7,600 megawatts of generation. So we own and operate both not only Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant, but also 60 plus hydro power facilities that we have in our portfolio. And then on the gas side, nearly 44,000 miles of gas distribution pipe and about 6,200 miles of gas transmission. So all in all, when you look at the asset infrastructure that we have, and you sum that up between gas and electric, it's a distance that's many times around the world, right? The distance being about 26,000 miles around the world. That just gives you a viewpoint into the significant asset base that we have to manage to ensure it's climate resilient, to ensure we're providing safe, reliable, affordable, and clean energy to our customers in our hometowns that we have the privilege to serve. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Great, thank you. So if I just step back and look at the urgent need for climate action, when you just look at not too far in the distant past, within our service area and more broadly within California, we're basically experiencing a second drought in the last decade. The first drought that we experienced within our service area was between 2014 to 2016. And obviously experiencing a second drought in less than a decade has continued to magnify the level of fuels and conditions that exist, which really create a significant challenge from a wildfire risk perspective. And as you can see, 83% of California was in extreme drought, 39% in exceptional drought, and the chart on the bottom, 2018 to 2021, shows how those numbers dramatically increased between the last 4 years. And when you look at kind of the last 2 decades, it's the largest drought that California has been in, or what's been characterized as a mega drought in history. And that's obviously leading to some changes and a very dramatic change within our service area in regards to the wildfire risk. And one of the things that we've started to experience is not just the catastrophic wildfire risk, which moved from, I would say, Southern California, which has been in place in San Diego since about 2007, and a decade later in 2017 in our service area, and which primarily was focused and limited to the time periods where we experienced extreme wind conditions, or what we call the Diablo winds up north and Santa Ana winds down south. But we've also seen in the last couple of years a significant amount of large fires that have occurred on non-red flag warning conditions. And the reason why that happens is the fuel on the ground is very dry because of the drought, and because of the fact that California has not kept up with the deforestation or the forest management practices. That creates a lot of volume of fuel. And then when you look at the slope and the terrain and the topography, with the beautiful state of California we have with the mountains, but if you add the terrain with the fuel and the dryness of the fuel and the amount of fuel, that's what really creates that catastrophic fire risk, even on a blue sky day, or what we call a hot summer dry day. And that's without the wind factor. And obviously, when the wind starts to blow, that further magnifies that catastrophic fire risk, as was experienced in our service area in 2017 with the Napa fires, 2018, the Camp Fire. So those are all examples of very, very catastrophic and significant wildfires. And when you look at 2022, so far, this has been the driest year over the last 128 years. So the point being that the risk for the wildfires continues to evolve at a very, very significant and dramatic pace. And how this overlays with our 70,000 square mile service area is more than 50% of our service area now is designated as what we call high fire risk. So what that means is, under elevated fire conditions, any potential ignition that may occur could result in a catastrophic fire. And when you look at how that number changed, and that was the designation in 2018, in 2012, which was about 6 years prior to kind of a revised analysis that was done with a multitude of stakeholders, the state fire department, the state regulator, the utilities in the state. That number for our service area in 2012 was less than 15%, which is 1.5. So it just gives you a perspective when we went through the drought in 2014 to 2016, that dramatically changed the landscape, and we nearly tripled the designation of high fire risk area in our service area itself. So this kind of a change, and if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Necessitates and requires not just PG&E, but I would say all the utilities in California, and this risk of wildfires is evolving beyond California, which I'm happy to talk about as well as part of the Q&A, but it requires us to fundamentally rethink how we design, construct, maintain, and operate our electric grid and system in light of the evolving wildfire risk. And we've got a multi-pronged approach on mitigating the wildfire risk. We first, have a focus when you look at this pillar on the left of mitigating wildfire risk, which is to inherently prevent any ignitions or sparks or arcs that may occur in the course of normal operation on an electric grid. Now, may surprise some of you, but when you look at the electric infrastructure across the world, the nature of that electrical system, when it operates, when you maintain that, it's a natural propensity to create a potential spark or an arc. In most parts of the world that don't have the same type of environment that we do, which is the dry fuels, volumes of fuel, and kind of topography, you don't see that same type of a fire risk because you have enough saturation on the ground with the moisture content that ignition is benign. And obviously that's not the case, within California itself. So our focus is a multi-layered approach to prevent the risk of ignitions in the first place, from our assets. And that, by the way, is not enough. There's a big part that also has to be done with many stakeholders that have responsibility for, forest management, fuels management, as well as defensible space, down to the individual customer residential level that live in these high fire risk areas. But if you focus on some of the things that we are doing to prevent ignitions from our system, it's multi-pronged. One is we had a recent announcement, and maybe not as recent now, about a year ago last year, that we're going to underground 10,000 of the highest risk miles in the high fire risk areas. And that's really to get the most risk reduction for the dollar spent, right, in terms of the investment. So that's the way we look at all the infrastructure and risk mitigations, which is how much risk are we getting in terms of risk reduction for dollar spent. And this kind of brings together the safety and affordability aspect of our focus. But that not only helps undergrounding with the wildfire risk mitigation, but also helps make the system more resilient to some of the extreme climate weather conditions. For example, December of last year, in some pockets of our service area in the higher elevation, we had a fairly significant snow event, and we had some of our customers that were out of power for 3-4 days when it was very cold. So one of the things that this actually helps with is also to help bring that resiliency from a reliability standpoint. To put the 10,000 miles in context, we have about 25,500 miles of overhead electric distribution lines in our high fire risk areas, but those 10,000 represent a large part of the risk that exists within that specific area. The second is we have implemented maintenance practices that go well beyond the minimum regulatory requirements. So this includes expanded vegetation, meaning keeping vegetation away from the overhead power lines. One of the primary causes of ignitions from electric assets is vegetation contact. And it could be, via a tree branch that breaks off and flies into an overhead line. It could be an entire tree that falls, that's tall enough, not far enough away from the power lines. And there's a lot of those within our service area, 8 million to be specific. And we're seeing obviously a dramatic degradation of the health of those trees because of the drought conditions as well. Bark beetle infestation is one example of how that hazard and degradation takes place. And then kind of the another layer of control is for us to do enhanced inspections of the health and integrity of our infrastructure. So we use the latest technology of drones capturing high resolution imagery of the condition of our equipment. And on the back end, we use artificial intelligence, machine learning models to process those high resolution photos to help make a determination of which components could have potential degradation, so that we can identify them proactively and mitigate that risk before the risk materializes. And then the last kind of focus here on mitigating the wildfire risk is really operating the grid differently. So what I mean by that is, we've got many smart devices on our system, from smart meters, which are not just capturing the automated usage for our customers, but we also outfitted the smart meters with what's called a voltage detector, so we can basically detect any voltage fluctuations that may occur, which is an indication of an anomaly or what's called a fault on the line, so we can proactively detect and de-energize very rapidly, to prevent the release of energy from a vegetation contact, animal contact, equipment failure. So we continue to minimize the likelihood of an ignition taking place. And some of the other things that we've done, some of you may have heard about the enhanced power line safety settings. It's basically a process by which we've re-engineered our smart devices, updated some of the algorithms, and when we see elevated fire conditions, we're able to switch it into the smart mode, if you want to call it, not unlike an alarm system that you may have at home, where you can arm and disarm your alarm system. We can kind of do the same when we have elevated fire conditions. All this can be done instantaneously, is done remotely via our control centers, and that actually helps increase the time sensitivity of the response of some of the smart devices. So if they detect any anomaly within the system itself, they can rapidly detect and shut off the power. Again, all in an automatic fashion to be able to prevent the risk of an ignition from occurring. And then the last but not least, when we do see those high wind type of scenarios, we will proactively do a public safety power shutoff. It's a measure of last resort now that's actually used by not just the California utilities, but many of the utilities in the Western US. And we obviously closely partner with our customers, those customers that may be at higher risk when we do a shutoff, like our medical baseline customers who rely on the power for their livelihood, as well as all of our critical customers like hospitals, schools, telecommunication agencies. So we've got a very robust process by which we do the communications, the engagement, all the way to the state operations center, the state fire department, and our regulator as well. So that's kind of the layers of protection on the wildfire risk side. And then on the center pillar there of minimizing customer impact, we know that some of the increased sensitivity of our smart algorithms and devices on the system, as well as the public safety power shutoffs, create a reliability challenge, for our customers. And in some cases, it's beyond just a reliability challenge, right? It could be a public safety issue, especially if you've got, some of our customers that may be relying on power for life support purposes. So we've got a significant focus through our customer organization on continuing to support our customers, understanding the needs of specific customers, providing the right level of resources when there's an outage that occurs, including providing portable batteries as backup for the medical devices, working with many of the community-based organizations to provide a suite of services on things like food delivery, on relocating folks into hotels, providing hotel vouchers as needed to be able to make them as comfortable as possible during that at-risk period of time. And then kind of the last pillar here is really maximizing our situational awareness. And I'm going to touch on this a little bit more on the next slide, but we have not only developed the in-house capability of meteorologists, which are basically evaluating the weather, but also fire science. So one of the things that we do is, sorry, I'm losing my voice here, but not only look at the adverse weather condition, but how does that weather impact the risk of fire? So we have many certified, trained professionals with a fire science background that have developed state-of-the-art models using artificial intelligence, again, machine learning, taking our service area, which is the 70,000 square miles, more than 50% of that, roughly 35,000 or so square miles that we would consider in high fire risk area, and establishing what we call these 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer grid cells, and have the precision and the accuracy now to be able to forecast at that level of granularity what are the fuel conditions, the volume of the fuel, the humidity levels, the wind conditions, all key factors that go into determining if we have elevated fire conditions. And we use many of that analysis as input to help determine how we operate the grid and the system to prevent the risk of ignition. So I'll share a video on the next slide on that, but we'll get to that in a minute. And then the other thing that we've done on maximizing situational awareness is we've saturated our high fire risk areas with both weather stations and high definition cameras. And that's really to be able to help provide the real-time intelligence, because weather stations are key to be able to capture input at the microclimate level on relative humidity, wind speeds, because all those factors go into determining the specific risk of wildfires. And then also the high definition cameras, which provide a visual confirmation if there's a potential smoke or fire ignition that may occur. And we share all of this data with all of our public safety partners. It's available on our website, pge.com/weather, to anyone publicly. And we have also worked with NASA here recently to be able to detect the thermal energy that's released from fires via satellite. So we also have a satellite detection capability when there's a potential fire ignition that takes place. So we've really tried to think out of the box in terms of maximizing that situational awareness. And if you go to the next slide, it starts to build to that a little bit more. The 550 plus cameras I mentioned, 1,200 plus weather stations. All this work we've done since 2019. One thing that we are also doing with the cameras, as you can imagine, the volume of data coming in, we've partnered with some of the best minds in technology, in our hometown of Silicon Valley, and incorporating some of the AI machine learning, again, kind of the common theme of the underpinning of the words I'm using here, right? There's 8 to 10 billion, right? That's 8 to 10 billion data points that we process on a daily basis, just to give you a perspective on the scale of the data coming in. And that data is used then to help inform what is that potential risk of fires or not. And then the AI machine learning actually superimposed on the cameras helps us potentially detect and give us an automatic alert, not just to us, but our public safety partners, who's the local fire department, state fire department, that has the jurisdiction to respond and suppress the fire safely. gives us that alert, if there's a potential, smoke signal that you see based on the change detection technology of the cameras itself. So that's kind of one feature that we're pretty excited about here recently that we're starting to build into our capabilities. And then all of this data comes into our 24/7, 365 days a year hazard awareness warning center, which is staffed 24 hours a day. Think about our hazard awareness warning center, very similar to air traffic control, for the airports, right, as an example. And what our professionals are doing here is monitoring all of the situational awareness, the cameras, the satellite detection, the Twitter feeds, the broadband network that's used, to dispatch fire crews. So all of that data is being tracked, monitored every second of the day to help identify if there's potential, ignition that has taken place, and then make sure the appropriate parties know about it so they can respond as effectively as they can. So, it's a pretty neat facility to be able to, not unlike, what you see in the NASA type of a control center, the big screens where you have a lot of the situational awareness information that's displayed. And then obviously, our professionals interact with that information. So one thing we can do is actually, tee up the video. And as you're teeing up the video, I'll share that we started the Hazard Awareness Warning Center just focused on wildfires. And we called it the Wildfire Safety Operations Center back in 2019, but since then we've expanded it to all hazards. So for example, if there's a seismic event that takes place, the Hazard Awareness Warning Center works with them and evaluates, right, is there potential damage that could have been experienced to our assets based on the magnitude, the location, the depth of the earthquake. And then we use that to help inform where we need to prioritize and dispatch, our qualified personnel to be able to do safety inspections of our assets. So that's another example of how we use the Hazard Awareness Warning Center. One other example is, as fires happen, and we've seen some rain events that come in, when a fire scar is left, it creates, debris flow because you've got unstable soil now in that environment. So it's important, as our personnel and personnel of the city and the county and the state are doing work to understand if there's a flow risk of debris flow. So they're not necessarily, putting themselves in the line of fire, so to speak. So the Hazard Awareness Warning Center has the mechanism to be able to process that information and then issue, those safety alerts out to the respective parties to ensure, first and foremost, their safety. So, and the safety of the residents in that area. So that's, a few examples of how we're taking the inspiration from the wildfire risk and expanding it to all hazards. But I'll pause, and we've got about a 2-minute, 30-second to 3-minute video here teed up. So if we can play that, that'd be great. Thank you.
PG&E has more than 30,000 miles of power lines located in high fire risk areas. To put that in context, that's more than the distance around the entire world. To safely run a system of this scale, we need state-of-the-art technology to understand where we might have the highest potential risks. That's why we use advanced tools that allow us to collect 8 to 10 billion data points every single day to help us understand key attributes of our assets, identify risk, and make real-time operational decisions. Our Fire Potential Index, or FPI, is an example of a data-driven process that is part of our daily operations. Every day, we run the FPI risk model across all high fire risk areas. The analysis includes real-time weather, like temperatures, wind speeds, and humidity levels. FPI also analyzes more advanced local data points like topography, vegetation type, and vegetation moisture. These conditions are reviewed down to the level of 2 by 2 kilometers across more than 65,000 square miles. With this data and our artificial intelligence and machine learning models, we make critical operational decisions, like enabling enhanced power line safety settings. With FPI, we can surgically identify where to enable EPSS. This pinpoints the areas where protection is needed while minimizing customer outages. When our meteorology team detects FPI conditions that meet EPSS activation triggers, EPSS is activated on select circuits. Activation triggers during winter and spring months, when wildfire risk is moderate, are dependent on FPI and other weather factors which target pockets of elevated fire risk. During summer and fall months, when there is sustained elevated wildfire risk conditions, EPSS is activated all the time except under conditions of heavy fog and rain. Here's an example from last year, when our crews found a fallen tree causing a wire down. Since EPSS was activated, power was automatically shut off in less than 1/10 of a second. This prevented a potential ignition that could have resulted in a consequential fire, and shows how our data drives operational decisions that make our system safer. Advanced risk modeling and real-time insight, paired with all our wildfire safety efforts, allow us to ensure all our teams are effectively planning and communicating each and every day, putting the safety of our customers and our hometowns at the heart of everything we do.
Thank you for teeing up the video. So I want to go back to the slide deck, and as you're bringing that back, one of the questions that I picked up on the chat is, how can we ever do enough mitigations given the reference to the 8 million trees? And one of the things that you saw in that video was that tree that fell over. And given that we've got the smart devices, smart algorithms, in that instance, an ignition did not happen, right? So the view that we're taking is we've got to create the capacity, that's the way kind of I frame it, to fail safe, meaning that even if a tree falls into our line and our system has to be resilient enough to be able to mitigate that risk of ignition, and if an ignition does occur, to ensure that the energy that's released is minimized so that ignition does not have a risk or a high probability of becoming catastrophic in nature. So that's the way that we're approaching our mitigations, and we are biased towards the operational type mitigations that you just saw in that video itself. So it creates that layer of safety within the system itself, without us having to try to identify a needle in the haystack of every hazard tree or high risk tree of the 8 million. We still do that because that's another layer of control. So it's a multi-layer kind of a mitigation approach, because we can never rely on one layer. And this is actually a concept that comes from the high hazard industries like nuclear, aviation, that are focused on ensuring that there's no process safety type of an incident. So the more layers of control you have, the less likelihood there is of a potential catastrophic incident from happening. So that's kind of the approach. But if you go to the next slide, this just provides kind of a quick view into some of the outcomes. We've reduced the number of ignitions by 30%, more than 30% over our last 3 years. When you look at our last 3-year average, it's on the tune of 100 to 150 type ignitions. Many of them are very, very small, right? They're like a quarter of an acre or less. So we've bent that curve, if you want to call it, to reducing it by more than 30%, and we have a focus on really eliminating all of the ignitions that could be catastrophic in nature. And that's one point to highlight is, I know it's a little counterintuitive, but just like a gas leak as well, right? And I can talk about this pretty much all day, but not every ignition is considered a catastrophic risk or high risk. So it really depends upon the conditions you have on the ground and on the field itself. So we've done a significant amount of work to mitigate those ignitions that could result in catastrophic fires. And then some of the statistics you see on the right-hand side of this chart really provide insights into the number of acres, buildings impacted that we've been able to avoid as a result of a public safety power shutoff event. Because as part of our protocol for a public safety power shutoff event, we patrol the lines to identify where the damage may have occurred or where a hazard exists. And then we're able to take that hazard and simulate had we not de-energized, what that fire spread would have been under those actual weather conditions, simulate what the number of acres burned would have been, what the number of buildings impacted would have been. And that's really the numbers that you see here in 2019 to 2021. And you can see that there's a significant number of acres and buildings that were avoided from being impacted as a safety benefit of the public safety power shutoff events. Again, the inconvenience and the potential safety risk of de-energizing for our customers is not lost on us, which is why we have a significant impact on ensuring their continued safety during that outage time period. But if we go to the next slide, kind of wrapping up on the next two slides here. So let me just take a step back, right? Giving you a view into the near-term actions, and a step back and look at more broadly, where are we headed in terms of our vision as it pertains to climate actions. So from the extreme weather, that's not just limited to California, obviously seeing it in the rest of the planet. And there's a significant, continued increased effect of changing climate that we're all experiencing. Earlier this year, we announced a set of longer-term climate goals, which reflect our plan to bring about a clean energy future in partnership with our customers and others. The framework that we use for this is what we call our triple bottom line, that's focused on serving our people, which is our teams, our contract partners who are working tirelessly every single day, every single hour to serve the 16 million people who are our customers in our own hometowns that we have the privilege to serve. The focus on the planet itself, and then the prosperity for California, given that it's not lost on us the big part that we play in the economy of enabling the economy of California. So overall, our commitment is to help heal the planet, and we believe that clean energy should be affordable and it should be inclusive of all economic and social backgrounds. So we set our climate goals with that focus that can help lead to an equitable and a viable transition that leaves no one behind. There's several specific aspects of the goals. So the first one is, for us to be, climate and nature positive energy system by 2050, a net zero energy system, by 2040, and that's 5 years ahead of California's carbon neutrality goal. And then we've got a series of 2030 climate goals to reduce our operational, carbon footprint, both from a generation perspective and from transmission and distribution. So some examples of that include delivering 70% renewable portfolio standard on electric generation. A lot of our generation is greenhouse gas, emission free, more than 85%, given that we've got a nuclear fleet, we've got a tremendous penetration of renewables within the state of California, and we don't have any coal in our footprint, so that helps in a big way. Delivering 15% of the renewable natural gas in our core, gas throughput. So not only are we focused on electric, we're also focused on gas itself, and then we also have a big focus on enabling the electric vehicles within the state of California, and to get to that goal of 3 million by 2030. Which is a significant increase from currently, which stands at about 375,000 electric vehicles in our service area today. And our, focus here is to make sure the grid is ready to increase the access to the electric vehicle infrastructure, support the adoption through rates, rebates, tools, and education. And we're all in on this, in the goal that California has set. We're also partnering with industry leaders on what we call the vehicle grid innovation at scale. We recently announced the electric vehicle charging technology partnership with both Ford and GM. And really, we're looking to reimagine the use of electric vehicles, not just to clean the electric or the transportation sector. When you think about, from an emissions perspective, and the transportation sector, is one of the largest contributors to emissions today, on the tune of about 40%. And we're currently piloting, the bidirectional charging or the vehicle to grid, innovation And the thought is to be able to use the electric vehicles as backup sources for customers as well during the cases, the outages itself. So overall, we're committed to partnering with a broad spectrum of our stakeholders. And, I know, Carl, you came off mute and we're about 13 minutes out, so I do want to get to Q&A. The last slide I'll leave you with is, this is, our vision of, the climate goals that I just discussed. And our strategy starts to talk about how we're going to do it. Right? We talk about our purpose of why we exist, which is to serve our hometowns, serving our planet, leading with love. And this applies to each and every one of our coworkers, contract partners. And this is a true north that our teams carry with them every single day. Our virtues of who we are: trustworthy, empathetic, curious, tenacious, nimble, and owners. And then our stands, and a lot of what you see on the right-hand side of the page is the how, which we've discussed quite a bit about in terms of the decarbonization of the energy system, making it more resilient. So I will pause there. I know there's a number of questions in the Q&A, and turn it over to you, Carl, to navigate.
I'm going to take advantage of the fact that you can see the Q&A.
Carl, I can. Yes, I can.
Yes, I'm going to kind of stand back and just let you respond. You can pick and choose on the questions. And I want just to thank you for a really informative talk. And it was loaded with information. And for those of you like me who are sort of overwhelmed, it's going to be available on our YouTube channel, so you can take another look to pick up information that maybe went by in excess of your own absorption capacity. So Sumeet, would you just go ahead and tackle the Q&A?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll call a halt at 1 o'clock.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Carl. Happy to do that. So, and to apologize for the volume of information that I may have shared, but I do appreciate the questions. There's 5 questions that I see, so I'll address them. So, John Eckhouse, thank you for your question. I believe I addressed this right after the video, and the question is, given the 8 million trees that need trimming to reduce the risk of falling on power lines and causing a fire, as well as the difficulty of checking every mile of transmission lines in forests, how can PG&E ever do enough mitigation while still generating a profit? And I think, John, I mentioned that our focus is to design the system from a resiliency perspective with the fact that we know a tree is going to fail, and it can fail anywhere at any time. We got to make sure that we create the fail-safe capacity in the system, and that's what a lot of our operational mitigations are focused on. And not only just mitigating that risk today, but mitigating that risk over time. And that's really, where our undergrounding, strategy comes into play that I mentioned at the onset, to make our system not just, reduced risk from a wildfire perspective, but more resilient to some of the extreme weather conditions. So I hope that's responsive to your question. The next question, Douglas Hutchings, thank you for your question. What is PG&E's responsibility and workflow once a risk materializes? More specifically, once a fault is detected and the line is de-energized, what happens next? Is there some way to validate if a fire has not been started? Yep. So a couple of layers to that question. So let me just kind of break it down. So when a fault is detected, it registers on our system instantaneously. It's a system called SCADA. It's an acronym for SCADA, which is Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. And it's not unique to us. It's used by many asset-intensive type companies. And once we detect that fault, the smart algorithms, smart devices I mentioned, automatically shut off. But we'll get instantaneous notification of that, and then we dispatch qualified personnel to do a visual inspection and assessment to identify what may have happened. Was there a down wire Was there, a potential animal that came in contact? Was there a tree that fell? So we actually go out and validate where, that fault occurred, what the trouble was, or what the issue was, and then safely do the repair, do the restoration, and then re-energize. So that's, kind of the way that that workflow works. Now, if there is a potential ignition that started, because a fault does not mean that it turns into an ignition every time. It's a much smaller percentage of faults that turn into ignitions, because all of the other conditions have to be there, right? In terms of the level of dryness of the fuel, the volume of the fuel, and of the likes. And yes, some of the things I mentioned, the high definition camera is one way that we can detect that fire, pretty quickly, especially with the AI machine learning that's layered in on there for change detection. The satellite detection that I mentioned with NASA, GOES. If there's a dispatch that's done, by the local fire department, we'll pick it up in the Hazard Awareness Warning Center. And then we also have, many retired fire professionals who are working and supporting PG&E, and they interface with our first responders really well. Their job is not to suppress the fire or put that out. We leave that to the professionals, but they do go out to the site itself and validate if an ignition, may have started. But we have a multitude of different mechanisms by which we can triangulate very, very quickly if a fire may or may not have started. So I hope, Douglas, that's helpful. The third question is from Tavia Stone Gibbons. Thank you for your question. Does the AI and machine learning that you are using come from in-house tools and teams, or are you leveraging the number of already established services provided by others, Salo Sciences, SDSC, Wildfire, FireMap? We use a combination, Tavia, of things. So one of the fire simulations that we do, and it's actually a very similar platform that's used by the other two large California utilities, and it's also being used by the state fire department now. It's a company called TechnoSilva, and we get the most up-to-date mapping of the fuel conditions that we have and the topography, and we're able to use that to simulate, in a risk model, fire ignitions to help determine which of those ignitions, which locations can be most catastrophic. And we, also study the last 30 plus years working with a company called Atmospheric Data Services, ADS, on meteorological historical evaluations that have occurred, and what are the worst of the 450 fire days that have occurred over the last 30 years. And we use all that input to help inform, what are the areas that may be most susceptible in terms of the highest fire risk. And then we use that to help inform the priority of where we're going to do things like undergrounding and additional wildfire mitigation. So, we do have a broad network, that we absolutely tap into. The AI machine learning that I mentioned, related to the capture of the photos and the imagery, we work with Amazon on that. So, there's a multitude of different entities that we partner with in that capacity. Next question, from Douglas again. Thank you, Douglas. With the technique of using cameras to detect smoke, approximately how big are the fires that you can detect? I imagine the fire must already be big to generate lots of smoke. So, it's a great question, Douglas. So I would say, there's two different things, and the evaluation that we're doing with the AI machine learning for cameras, it's in the pilot stage. We're very optimistic. The detection that we did, was a fire that was a couple of acres, right? So it's a fairly small fire, I would say, to start off with. And what we're working on, and the reason I made a mention to pilot, is to be able to help discriminate some of the other types of elements that emanate smoke, right? You could have a refining plant as an example, vehicle smoke, right? So there's things that we're trying to work on how do you, really perfect and focus on those fire ignitions itself. But on the satellite side, there's two elements that we look at. And what's interesting about the fire behavior is, depending upon the type of fuel, the volume of fuel, we pick up the amount of thermal energy that's released. So higher that thermal energy, the less and the smaller the fire size has to be able to detect it. So it does not have to be, a 50, 100, 200 acre fire for us to be able to detect it. So we can get it, when it's, fairly small in size. And it's all about, when you detect the fire, how quickly you can, respond, notify the agencies that have authority, and then they subsequently, responding to it. Because the first couple of minutes, the first 30 minutes are kind of critical to making sure that the fire can be contained. So some of the other things that we've also done in that space is, we own 4 Blackhawks, but we make them available to the fire departments as well, through the same contractors that they use. So adding some additional suppression capacity capability, for their response. So I hope that helped, Douglas. Go to the next question. Avide Zakor, thank you for your question. How can we access the image video data you capture in order to run AI for various objectives, fire detection? So Avide, we don't make that information public because, as you can imagine, there's some information that's sensitive, in regards to the physical, risk associated with making that information public, because many of our assets tend to have a lot of physical security, cybersecurity type of protections in place. One thing I will share with you, Avide, is that I've recently been engaged with UC San Diego's fire lab, and one of the things that they're looking to do is how to make some of the data that the utilities are using in the state of California more public. So you kind of invite an open platform, and you kind of make it more anonymous, per se. So it's not tied to a specific location, to a specific utility, but more for the purposes of being able to advance the sciences, both from an academic and an innovation perspective. So more to come on that. But today we don't make that type of data public. What we do make public is the camera, satellite detection, and the weather station. You can get that from pg.com/weather. So I'm going to race to the next question from Jahan. I think it's the last one. For full protection, will PG&E need to put a sensor on every mile of its distribution and transmission line? So the answer is no, John. It's not every mile. So the way it works is, some of the devices, industry term called line reclosers, we have them spaced it depends on the type of circuit, depends upon the length, depends on the loading condition. Many of these reclosers can protect, 10s and 20s and 30s, types of miles, right? So it's not just a mile at a time from a sensor perspective. Many of these devices, can detect, protect many miles at a time. And what we're trying to do is sectionalize and limit that to the extent possible, because the idea is that whenever we have an automated de-energization, we want to make sure that we are very targeted and minimize the impact for our customers. So I think I got through all the questions in a blitz. It's right at the top of the hour. I'll pause there, and Carl, turn it back over to you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, I really appreciate your talk. We are disciplined and ending things at 1 sharp. We maybe slipped over a minute, but really appreciate your talk. And again, I remind everybody that your talk is available, or will be available actually tomorrow at noon on our YouTube channel. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Take care, be safe, and have a great day.
Yeah, thank you.